Welcome to Bible in the Backyard. Here we are in our backyard wilderness in Jamaica Estates, Queens. Numbers chapter 33. This chapter describes the trek through the wilderness and a summary of the journey from the initial starting point in Ramses through all 42 stops, almost all 42 stops, to the final embankment along the Jordan. We sort of know from the earlier narratives, very dramatic narratives, the journey, the story of the journey and all the different stops. And so it presses us to think, why do we have a repetition and a list of all the stops along the journey? Is there something significant about it for either the generation that's living it or for the reader who's looking at the summary of the trek?
Yeah, so some of the places are familiar, especially in the latter part of the list. We've heard stories about Kivrot Ta'ava, so we're not surprised to hear that they camped at some point in Kivrot Ta'ava. But the first part of the list is actually full of names that we haven't heard before. And it's interesting because, of course, these are places where apparently they camped, but nothing of note happened there. And this chapter, this itinerary, stands in a bit of tension with the notice at the beginning of Deuteronomy, where we're told it's an 11-day walk from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea. In this itinerary, it's about 20 stops from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea, which I guess they could have done in 11 days, but obviously it sounds like that's a lot longer. And that maybe suggests already what the point of this list is. It sounds like a lot of these places were places that they wandered to, maybe wandered back to, maybe they left Chorev, wandered a couple of places, came back to Chorev. At some point there's an 11-day march from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea, but this list of 42 places is actually going nowhere. It's an itinerary of futility. They seem to be just walking around in circles. Even if they spent much of the time in Kadesh Barnea, as you say, they camped 40 other places, which led them to nowhere other than to be on the precipice, finally. And maybe that's really the only point that you could say, is that we're now at the very end of the book of Numbers, getting to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, of course, is going to be all set as the sort of penultimate stage before the entry into the land. So we have a summary of the last 40 years, which have gone by over the course of the book of Numbers, and actually a sense that we've been going around in circles, we haven't done so much, but now we're getting to the start of the Jordan, and then we'll get maybe to the last stage of the journey.
I mean, perhaps maybe also there's something to be said about that journey of going nowhere, right? It's a sense of you're walking in the present, and there's a sort of meditative quality we hear a lot about, right? The ultimate meditative quality is walking. And kind of like being grounded to where you are at that moment and without a particular end point in sight. So maybe this is the people, I don't know, perhaps they kind of needed that before the next leg of the journey, having come from what they've experienced, what they're about to experience, is that sometimes we actually just have to kind of be in the present moment, and maybe that travel and that journey is about that.
It would be great to know if they could have felt that back then.
I will read it that way.
Sounds good.
Thank you.